Just waiting on just a couple more minutes for people to start joining, and then we will get started in a second. All right, guys, we might get started, and as people join in, then I'll just add them in. So thanks everyone for turning up for our webinar, how to get back to your best post-lockdown. So for those who don't know me, my name's Jackson. I'm part of the S&C team here at Precision Athletica. And we wanted to make a webinar today just to give you some information and some ideas as to how to safely return back to training now that gyms and sports are starting to come back. We really wanted to just try and make sure that you return in a safe manner, but an effective manner at the same time. So for today, you're going to be hearing from Sam, so one of our other S&C coaches here at Precision Athletica. So I'll get Sam just to give a quick introduction, and then from there you can get started.
Lovely. Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Obviously, Jackson and I work together, and we've been discussing about a return to training and the best way that you guys can get amongst it and get back to your best post-lockdown. It's an exciting time for us all. Finally back into the gyms. A little bit about myself. So I'm obviously a strength and conditioning coach at Precision. I was with the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs in the NRL for a number of years as an athletic development coach. And one of my big beliefs is the profound effects purposeful training can have on personal development. So not just what we're achieving in the gym, but the people that it makes us into and the character it creates. Today's webinar is going to be about getting back to your best. So we're navigating the risk of ramping up too quickly, how to safely build some load back into your training. We're going to have some tips and examples, and then any questions as well to help you out along the way. Now, I think Jackson's going to set up so you guys can answer some questions into the chat. We'll get to them at the end, but yeah, anything you think of, if you want to just jot that down straight away, that way we'll be able to jump on them right at the end there. A good place to start, I think, is the current situation. So obviously, we're still in the midst of COVID lockdown in New South Wales, obviously coming to an end, hopefully very, very soon. But let's look at where we've been the past 3 months or so. So many people are not training at all. Unfortunately, due to gym closures or casual contacts or whatever it may be, a lot of people are inside, they're working from home, and there's not a lot of training going on. Those that are training are normally doing so from their home, from their garage, from parks. And because of that, we're normally limited by weight, by equipment, and generally less structure as well. I know me personally, I've been training outside. If it's raining, it means we're not training that day. So it really plays into it a little bit in how much we're able to get done. So what does this period mean? It means over the last 2 to 3 months, less load has been placed on our system, and our acute and chronic workload has decreased. Now, what I mean by acute and chronic, acute workload, we're normally looking at the past 7 days. So how much work have we done in the last week? Then we compare that with our chronic workload, which is typically around the last 28 days, so 4 weeks. And we look at how much work we've accomplished in the last month. Obviously, the last 3 months, both our acute and chronic has been going down just because of our access to equipment and also the amount of work we've been able to do. So that plays into the debate of capacity versus load, or the topic of capacity versus load. It's a pretty general idea, and it's pretty simple in its nature, in that all tissues have a certain capacity. So when I talk about tissues, I'm talking about our skeletal muscle, but also whether it be our bones or any other kind of tissues in our body, we've got a certain capacity that they can tolerate. If the mechanical load we're applying to these tissues is greater than the capacity they hold, we're going to be at a higher risk of injury. So with this time off, with our decreases in our load, the amount of stress we're putting on the system, that capacity has obviously decreased. Now that presents these two scenarios here for injury. So we can see in that scenario one, that if we come back too much too soon, so when the load exceeds the capacity, injury is going to be more likely. So that's coming back and going, hey, it's week one, we're back in the gym, let's load up the squat rack and we're going for maxes. When you haven't been squatting either at all over the last 3 months, or you've been squatting with, let's say, a small dumbbell or a couple of backpacks filled with books, it's really not going to equate. And when you're already adapted to squatting with backpack, all of a sudden you've got 120 kilos on your back, we're going to really put ourselves in a bad position there. The other scenario we've got here is a reduction in tissue capacity can exceed and can increase the risk of injury. So we've got poor sleep, stress, illness, poor nutrition. Also, poor recovery is going to play into that there, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But if we are giving ourselves a stimulus, but they're not recovering from it, that tissue capacity is going to go down. Again, if we then give it another load, we're going to be putting ourselves at risk of injury. So what does this all mean? Well, it means we need to be smart in how we return to these higher levels of activity, or the risk of injury is going to be high. We injure ourselves, it's pretty much like going straight back into lockdown, because it means we're not going to be able to do what we want to be doing. So what does a smart return to training look like? Well, these 5 things are definitely not an exhaustive list, but I think they're 5 things that really sum it up well, and things that I definitely look for in someone's smart plan or their return to any type of increase in activity. So taking it easy early, which is sometimes really, really hard for people to do, but we always want to be leaving petrol in the tank for those first workouts. I want you to be able to have a workout and it's pretty much a 5 or 6 out of 10 in terms of effort, and you go, I've got more left in the tank there. Great. That doesn't mean we do extras at the end. That means we go, that's a win for today. I've done more than I did yesterday, but I've still got this much left in the tank that the next time I come back, I'm able to increase it again without exceeding that capacity of our tissues. Again, the second point there plays into that. So we're focusing on building capacity in the tissues rather than just chasing numbers. We don't want to be maxing out. We don't want to be doing, AMRAPs or as many reps as possible. We're focusing on just building quality capacity in these tissues, giving it something that it hasn't had before in an extensive nature, so in a low intensity nature, so that we know that once we increase the intensity, our tissues already have a base foundation of what they can handle. We're not just going to be shooting for the stars. We're really going to be trying to build a pyramid here where we're building a wide base, which means the higher up it can go. Small incremental increases. Again, it's not sexy. It's not, hey, we're going to do a 50 kilo PB here or anything like that. It's just going a little bit at a time. And that, again, plays into what we're talking about in having give ourselves a stimulus which isn't exceeding that capacity, but it leaves a little bit more each time, so that we can come up in a sustainable manner. Recovery modality. So when we talk about recovery, everybody thinks about the, cool things to do, whether it's an ice bath or chucking on some compression garments or getting in the infrared saunas or whatever it is. But the real recovery modalities I want you guys to focus on when returning to training: good nutrition, good sleep, and really the rest of this. So taking it nice and easy and assessing your game plan. Sleep and nutrition, if they were packaged into a pill and sold in the shops, it would have everything on it in terms of increasing mental clarity, increasing strength. It's going to do this for you, make you feel better. But because it's just something we do every day, we really don't take too much notice of it. But especially in this return to activity, it's something we really, really want to focus on. and giving ourselves the adequate nutrition to make sure we recover from each of these bouts of exercise. This all kind of gets summed up in essentially having a plan. We want to be able to have a nice set out plan. It's not set in stone, but something that's going to give us a guideline of where we're going and a way that we're going to do it in a sustainable manner. If we go into each session with no real plan and we're just going, yeah, this looks like a great exercise, or oh, I might try this today, then it makes it very, very hard to track and very hard to measure how well we're doing when we're constantly trying to go down every single path. So how can we formulate this plan? Well, one big thing I'm a fan of is a term called reverse engineering. Sounds pretty fancy, but all it is looking at the goal of the program and just working backwards from it. Something I've put here, and it's a Confucius saying, and that the man that chases 2 rabbits catches neither. I think that can be extrapolated a little bit for strength and conditioning and say the man that chases 5 rabbits catches none. I think we can have multiple goals for a program, but we need to have that slimmed down or trimmed down a bit. So there's only maybe 1 or 2 that we're going to focus on. Too many goals, and we're just essentially trying to do too much with our time, and all the increases are just going to be pretty negligible. So once we've established what the goal of the program is, we can then go, okay, what type of training is going to drive us closer to that goal? What type of training fits in with my end product that I'm looking for? So if I'm trying to increase my 5K running time, then maybe strongman training or bodybuilding and heavy hypertrophy training isn't going to drive me closer to that goal, and I should probably steer away from it. Once we know what type of training is going to drive us closer to the goal, we want to then assess ourselves personally and go, what is most suitable for our current training age? So we really want to be looking at the lowest hanging fruit here. We want to be looking at the biggest bang for your buck methods or exercises that we can implement without going too complex and really robbing ourselves twice, I suppose, because we're giving ourselves a stimulus that we're not ready for. And then when we are ready for it, we've already been exposed to it, so it's going to be less effective. We really want to look at what's the most simple kind of way we can incorporate this into our training. After we have those 3 things of the goal, the type of training, and the type of training suitable for us, we can then look at some other considerations. So how often do we want to train? What are our likes and dislikes in terms of exercises or training, whether it be morning or night? What injuries have we experienced before, and what equipment is available to us? Hopefully some gyms are going to be opening up soon, so we can get in there and have a lot wider range. But for example, if we go into another lockdown, or if there's another situation like this, we want to be considering what's available to us, because we can have the perfect plan, but if we can't implement any of it because we don't have the equipment, then it's not really worth the paper it's written on. Okay, so how do we assess how we're going with our plan? Well, recording and tracking your training will allow you to avoid any big spikes in load. So it allows us to track the progress and see improvement, while also hopefully avoiding some injury. So we can assess afterwards how hard a session was, and then depending on how hard it was, we know how much we should be focusing on recovery before the next hard session. Bit of a plug here, better yet, and I am 100%, this is the way to go. Everybody sign up after this, but Precision Athletica will formulate your plan, monitor your loading and progress, and then we're going to help you return to training in a safe and efficient manner. Not just that, but obviously we want you guys to achieve your goals. So it's not just the return to training, but it's what comes afterwards. Now, what I'm talking about here in terms of assessing afterwards, how hard your session was, focusing on recovery, we've got up here in the right corner a super compensation or an adaptation curve. So we can see here that we start at this gray line. That's our baseline. We're going to give ourselves then a training stimulus. So let's say we give ourselves this green line. We've had a workout. It was pretty tough, but it was okay. Our body goes through this alarm stage where it's going, hey, we were not prepared for that. We're going to have to do something to be better prepared next time. As we recover, and that's aided by proper nutrition, sleep, whatever else we need, we go through this stage where we then rise above our baseline. We go through a super compensation where we're now better than where we were before. So ideally, we now want our new baseline to be up near the top of this curve. Obviously, if we wait too long before we train again, then that negative adaptation then comes back down and we return to baseline. Look, at the end of the day, if we have a good training session, good recovery, but we don't time our training right, we might just go back to baseline. Not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. What we don't want to be doing is having a really hard workout, or maybe it's just a good workout, but we don't focus on our recovery at all. Whether it's too hard or we don't recover, we can end up on this red line. So what happens then is that regardless of what's happening here in the time that passes, we might think that this is a good time to train again, but we haven't even returned to baseline, let alone super compensated to be better than where we were before. What can happen then is that we just keep traveling down. It's down and down. Our baseline is now decreasing rather than increasing. We enter into overtraining or detraining. And again, that's where injury is going to be a real problem. By being able to objectively assess our training and track how we're going, we want to be avoiding this red line here. So what's an easy way to calculate load? I know that sounds all pretty confusing and pretty subjective and a bit out there, but an easy way to do it is by using this RPE scale, or rate of perceived exhaustion or effort. What we're going to do is we're going to take the amount of work, we're going to take the RPE that we've given for that session, and then we're going to multiply it by the duration of that session to give you the SRPE, which just means session rate of perceived exhaustion. It's going to give us an arbitrary number, which probably doesn't mean a lot, but let's just go through this process of going, okay, the session was hard, we could still maintain intensity throughout, and we could still speak. So I'd probably give that session a 7 out of 10. The session duration was 55 minutes. So we go 7 times 55, 385. That number by itself really doesn't mean a lot. 385 what? Nothing. It doesn't mean anything. But once we keep doing this, and once we build out what we were talking about before, some acute workloads and some chronic workloads, we can now compare that session to whatever else we did in the week, perhaps what we did in months past. And it gives us an idea of where we are in our recovery should this session have felt that hard. Maybe this session was easier than it should have been, and we're actually increasing our fitness, but it lets us give a good indication of where we are at currently with our training. Let's go through some examples. So let's go, we have Tommy. Tommy's goal is to return to activity. He's been in lockdown. He just wants to get back out. He wants to improve his strength. That's his primary goal. He also wants to improve some cardiovascular fitness. You know, he wants to feel good. He doesn't want to be puffed walking around the corner to go to the shops. All right, so how many days a week will we train? Well, we want enough volume to increase some strength. We also need to consider that he needs some conditioning and he needs some recovery in there. Something that we won't really go into, and it's not really in the scope of this chat, but we also should be considering sports training and how that fits in with our goals and also our training. So something I put together here is going, okay, cool. We want to improve our strength. Let's do 3 strength sessions. Obviously, because he's returning to activity, we want to be mindful of recovery. And so we'll use some light conditioning or some aerobic conditioning on the days between the Tuesday, Thursday to act as some recovery, while also getting some adaptations that are achieving that secondary goal of fitness. So we've got strength, conditioning, and then on Saturday, we got, depending on how we're feeling, we might do some conditioning or some rest, and then Sundays off. So when do we hit the gas or hit the brakes? So if we go hard every day, our recovery is going to be diminished, like I was just saying. The load will then begin to exceed the capacity, and injury is going to become much more likely. So an easy way to structure our training is something called the high-low training model. It was developed by a track coach, Charlie Francis. It's something that's coming up a lot now in sports performance. And essentially, it's periodizing or just setting out our training in a way where we are maximizing our recovery while still getting the benefits that we're looking for. So for Tommy here, his strength training is going to be typically the most neurally demanding part. So the most part that's putting a stress on our central nervous system. He's trying to move weight. He's really getting into it. He's concentrating a lot as well. It takes a toll on his brain. So we're going to put them as our high days, hence where it's coming up this peak. For the conditioning, we're going to do aerobic conditioning. It's less than 70% effort. It's just going to be getting back into that training, but it's also going to help facilitate some recovery. So we're going to put that on our low day. So we've structured this now in a way that we go through these ebbs and flows where we're getting what we want for these high peaks. We're then letting ourselves recover on these troughs, but we're also driving the adaptation that we want. So now that we've looked at the overall goal, we've gone down into our week and how we can structure it. Let's now look at what a training day looks like. So this is a very general, and it's going to change for each person's personal situation, but generally this is the way I like to structure a training day. So the ones in red or orange are typically more field-based stuff, and then the blue is going to be more based in the gym. But it all goes by the same principles. So we try to move from exercises with the highest speed and force to lowest. So think about when you're sprinting, for example, you're putting massive amounts of force into the ground with every step. Then we're doing some agility. So change direction and beat your opponent. You're really having to put a high amount of force into the ground, change your direction, and move away from your tackler or whoever you're opposing there. Sports practice, again, we're at that chaotic environment where everything's moving fast. Then we can contrast that going down all the way to the list to accessory and rehab exercises. So generally they're going to be lower intensity and lower speeds. Exercises with the highest risk should be pushed towards the start. So if we're going to put ourselves in a risky situation, and let's be honest, sport injury happens. It's a risky situation. Sport practice carries with the injury risk. We would be smart to put that towards the start of our training. Same with speed and agility. We know things like hamstring injuries or ACLs or whatever it is. These are high risk activities. We want to put them towards the start where we're fresh and when neurally we're very in sync and awake and we know what we're doing to minimize that risk. Also, the most technically demanding elements we want towards the start. If we're trying to get better at something, we want to make sure we're doing them technically correct or to a technical model, which means we probably want to be quite fresh from it so we can really ingrain that in our psyche. Obviously, then there's always exceptions to this. You might want to be practicing skills under fatigue, but that's going to come later. Now, some people, obviously, they go sports practice. It's second in the list. I train, footy on a Tuesday night. How am I supposed to do that first in the day? Well, obviously, this is the ideal, but it's not the way it's always going to happen. So using these ideas and applying them into your training is always a good way to go. It's not this is the magic formula, but it's just something good to think about. And some examples of progressions for our strength and conditioning. So this is now getting down into our sessions. This is definitely not saying this is the way we should be doing it, and this is definitely not a perfect program to return to, but it's just to give you guys an example of how we can progress over the weeks to get back to where we were. So for strength training, we might start week 1 doing 2 sets of 10 on a given exercise. We want that first week to feel easy to moderate. It's, yeah, I'm getting something from this. It's a stimulus I haven't given my body for a number of months, but it's still relatively easy and I can do it without too much worry. That means the next week we can go, okay, great. We achieved that. We're feeling great. Recovery was good. I can now do that again, but increase the volume. So we might keep the same load for this example, but we're increasing the volume. So we're now, instead of doing 20 reps, we're doing 30. After that, week 3, we might then go, okay, we feel really comfortable with this. We're now at a stage where adding more and more volume probably isn't the way to go. Maybe let's increase the load. So we're going to do the same set and rep scheme as we did the week before, but we've now added a bit of weight. We were doing 10 kilos before. Now we're doing 12. Again, it's these small incremental increases that are going to give us long-term results. Increasing the load doesn't mean going from 10 kilos to 40 kilos. We just want little bits up so we can have that sustained success. Week 4, we might then decrease the volume. We're now at the point where, okay, we're 3 by 10, we've increased the load, we've increased the volume. Now for me to keep increasing the load, I need to decrease the volume. By doing that, it allows us to lift a heavier weight with less load on the system. So we're still giving it something it can adapt to, but we're not exceeding that capacity. And so as you can see here, an increase in volume followed by a decrease and an increase in intensity. Something we can use as well to track this is those SRPEs that we were talking about. We might stay at a 3x10 for multiple weeks, but we might go for this first week, we want to be a 6 out of 10 in terms of our RPE. Then the next week, we might want to be a 7 out of 10. Then the next week, an 8 before we decrease in volume. There's a million ways to do this, but what I want you guys to really get a grasp on is that we want to have small progressive increases in our training in some type of way, whether that's through load or volume. Conditioning, pretty simple progression here in that we can go, okay, we're going to do tempo runs. So we're doing an aerobic style of conditioning in where we're working at 60 to 70% of our max pace. So it's nice and easy. It's not too hard. We might go 10 sets of 60 seconds on, 30 seconds off. So we're giving ourselves a stimulus, then we're resting, so we're not going too hard. The next week, we might up that to 12 sets. So we've added 2 minutes of work there in a week. Then we might go 14, 16. And similar to strength training, we might then go, okay, I feel really comfortable with this. Let's now increase the amount of work we're doing on each set. So we're going to 90 seconds. But we've decreased it down to 10 sets now. Another way we can progress is taking note of the total distance of each of the sessions. So we might stay on the 10 sets with the 60 seconds on, 30 seconds off, but we might monitor how many meters we're accomplishing in that 60 seconds. We might get 100 meters week 1. Then week 2, we might get 120. Then week 3, we might get 135. That shows us that if we're recording and tracking our training, we're still seeing progress, even though it might say this same prescription of 10 sets by 60 and 30 for the full 5 weeks. But we've actually been progressing and getting fitter because we can then look at our total distance and go, great, we're actually doing more and more on each set. Again, I'm not saying this is the way to do it, but picking whatever your metric is going to be to measure by and being able to go, good, I'm having small incremental increases each week while focusing on recovery and making sure I'm not putting myself at too high a risk of injury. That's about it, guys. Obviously, if you've got any questions, more than happy to answer them. And if there's no one who wants to ask any questions, you can always contact us at Precision Athletica. We're super, super excited to get back into the gym and help you guys. And yeah, if there's anything you need at all, please get in contact with us. But that's about it, Jacko.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Sam. So yeah, look, guys, like Sam said, it's really important for when we get back into training to be smart with your training approach. So don't just go foot on the pedal straight away. Start to ease your way into it and make sure that you have long sustained improvement as opposed to that high peak and then that long drop off after that. So I'd invite anyone now, if they have any questions, to please write it in the chat box and Sam is happy to answer them. I have a question for Sam. So Sam, if someone who was training prior to lockdown, how would they go about establishing what their baseline is at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. So let's say we've got someone who was recording their training prior to lockdown. They had a really good handle on where they were physically. Then we could go back to 50% of where they were. Obviously, that might be a massive drop for them, but let's take into consideration it's been months without too much sustained exercise. 50% if we go back to that for the first week, and then we could see 5 to 10% increases from there. Obviously, that's taking into consideration that this person has been, keeping track of their training. Without that, it would be more of the way of going, let's start super easy at the start and let ourselves have that petrol in the tank for each workout after.
Cool. Any other questions, guys?
I must have just been that good. I've answered everyone's questions without them asking.
I think so. I think, yeah, it sounds like you answered a lot of the questions. So if there's no other questions, guys, then thanks, Sam, for your presentation today. Like Sam said, if anyone has any specific questions and they come up with it after the seminar today, feel free to either get in contact with us via the Precision Athletica website. If you want to speak to us in person, you have the ability to do that via the Precision Athletica website as well. Or if you have any other specific questions, if you'd like to get anything specific, please contact Precision Athletica either via email or their telephone number, and then organize a time that we can meet with you and we can go through that. Okay, cool. All right, thanks guys, thanks for turning up, and we look forward to everybody returning back to training shortly.
Keen, thanks guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.